Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. It's really good to see. I mean, this is always a small, intimate roundtable sort of lunchtime conversation, but larger number than normal, which is excellent because this is such an important topic. I'll just say a few words of introduction and opening, but then pass to David to introduce yourself, David, and panelists. So this is we have these on Wednesday lunchtimes. We normally go for an hour. We can go a little bit longer today if we sort of mid conversation, but it's sort of generally an informal discussion around the table. The first half being presentations, and then the second half being discussion. Let me carry on to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and this is unceded land, so we're there as their guests. Our presence upon them, but we acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. And that's really important for every conversation, but certainly it's relevant for what we're talking about today. We're really fortunate to be having a really informed panel discussion today. I wish we could say that we're talking in past tense about something that occurred and is now sort of receding, but it's not receding, and that's why it's so important we talk about it today. I'm tempted to say more, but I won't say more. So, David, I'll pass to you if you could introduce yourself and say a few words about yourself, but also about the panelists. One thing to bear in mind is we've got people online on Zoom, but also we're recording this, which I think is very helpful because other people maybe can't join us at this time of day, but can pick up the recording. So the audio recording is important, which means you counterintuitively need to press the red button so it goes off, so that your microphone is on. And that way we'll get a nice clear audio recording. So thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Greg, for the warm welcome. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody who has made the effort to be here today and to be part of this important discussion, which we want to, of course, keep it as informal as much as possible. But I'm also grateful that we've had this number of people joining us on this topic today. My name is David Leek, and I'll partly be a moderator of this. We will only have two speakers among us ourselves, and I'll introduce the team shortly. But firstly, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Secondly, I acknowledge and appreciate the Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization and Deakin University entirely for offering us this opportunity to present to you on the urgent topic and complex situation of the conflict in Sudan. I thank in particular Kira Baka, who has been very terrific in putting all this together for the last few weeks and a month that we've been in contact with her. Briefly about myself, I'm a student here at Deakin University, a PhD student in political science. I did my thesis on conflict-induced displacement, which is pretty much looking at the narratives of dispossession, war, and transnationalism of South Sudanese in Australia, focusing on the conflict, the Second Sudanese conflict between 1983 and 2005. Without much ado of myself, I also acknowledge those who are with us via Zoom, and I can see my supervisor is also there, Professor Benjamin Isaachan. Thanks for being here. So I'll briefly introduce the panelists who will speak with you today on this particular topic. Some of us may not speak due to time, and we also want to engage with all of us on the Q&A session at the end. So firstly, I will introduce Dr. William Abur. Dr. William Abur is currently a lecturer in social work and researcher at the University of Melbourne. He also PhD in refugee studies and resettlement experiences from Victoria University. Second, I introduce my other colleague, Mrs. Akuc Deng, on my right here. Currently a PhD candidate in education here at Deakin University. Her research focuses on gendered perspective on access and participation in education, in higher education among migrant and refugee women here in Australia. She is also an educator and a researcher at Murdoch Children's Research Institute, MCRI, on intergenerational health, focusing on stillbirth prevention. Third, I introduce one of my colleagues, Dr. Marial Aduot. Marial is a 2022 Deakin PhD graduate here in political science, currently an academic researcher with expertise in security sector reform in fragile states. His research focuses on post-war politic states challenges and managing small arms and integrating ex-combatants. Dr. Marial is currently also a program manager at the Multicultural Youth Services here in Melbourne. And finally, I introduce my other colleague, Dr. Mach Deng. Dr. Mach Deng is presently a Mackenzie postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Melbourne. He researches on South Sudanese public law, the relationship between peace building and constitution making in states, and South Sudanese customary law and practices. So this is the team. And just to delve briefly into a brief overview, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues. So a brief overview of the problem that we are going to be discussing today. The conflict in Sudan, which is now in its third month, shows no signs of abating, but intense confrontation between the warring parties. The country's two rival generals have defied numerous ceasefires as they vie for control of the government. Abdel Fattah el-Buran, commander of Sudanese armed forces, who enjoys local and international legitimacy, first gained power after the 2019 ousting of the long-term Sudanese dictator Omar al-Bashir, and later cemented his position in a 2021 coup against a civilian government headed by Prime Minister Abdel Fattah. In fighting Mohammed, Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti, who heads the paramilitary rapid support forces, who was under Bashir. Hemeti led the RSF, formerly known as the Janjaweed, alongside Buran's army in Darfur. While both el-Buran and Hemeti worked together following the 2019 and 2021 coups respectively, their relationship became unstable as both generals disagreed over power and mechanisms of how to merge the RSF into the Sudanese army. The clashes, which began in April 15th of this year, have so far resulted in substantial social, political, and economic, as well as humanitarian implications. Notably, this conflict between Buran and Hemeti is not just a domestic dispute over power and control. Geographically, Sudan is a vital bridge that links the Middle East and Africa. This means the battle that has raged over the last 3 months has not only taken a regional dimension, but also an international one. In discussing these dimensions, implications in depth, I would now like to invite two of my panel members to address them at length and also give us a bit of an insight about these implications as well. So once the two presenters have concluded, we will then open the floor for any questions that we may have. So I will first of all invite my colleague, Dr. Mach Deng, to go with the first session.
All right, thank you very much, David, for that great introduction. Good afternoon to you all. Good to see you in attendance. What is happening in Sudan, the crisis in Sudan, is deeply complex. And there is no an easy solution to it. It is getting deeper and deeper day by day. I can only, explain to you what went wrong, what led to the war, and the attempts that are being made to try to resolve the war and the impact of the war. So let me begin with a little bit of history on Sudan. After achieving independence from Britain in 1956, Sudan went through periods of political instability where governments came to power through a military means. So far, Sudan has had around 35 coups, including attempted coups. And I think that makes Sudan the country that has the highest number of coups in the continent in Africa. That's not something to be proud of, but that's a reality. The last president to stage a coup in Sudan in the 20th century was Omar Hassan al-Bashir in 1989. That's him there in the uniform. And he ruled Sudan as the military leader from 1989 until 2019, when he was forcibly removed by the Sudanese military in collusion with civilian protesters led by a nonviolent movement known as the Forces for Freedom and Change, the FFC. So following the overthrow of President Bashir, a transitional military government was instituted in Sudan. That government was led by General el-Buran, General Abdel Fattah el-Buran, and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo as his deputy. So the two leaders basically conspired to remove the dictator and then instituted a military government. General Dagalo is actually, as David mentioned, the leader of the Rapid Support Forces, which is some sort of a de facto military unit. You would be forgiven if you think of the Rapid Support Forces as the equivalent of the Wagner Group in Russia. So after the transitional military government was instituted in 2019, the people of Sudan continued to protest in droves, demanding that the country institute democratic process. And so they continued to protest, and that basically forced the two generals to negotiate a peace agreement with a civilian movement, the Forces for Freedom and Change. That agreement was finalized in 2019, and it basically created what is called the Sovereignty Council, which was a transitional government made up of military elements led by the two generals and civilian elements led by Prime Minister Abdel Fattah. So that transitional government had a transitional period of 39 months, starting in August 2019. So for the first 21 months, General el-Buran and Dagalo had to lead the council. And for the remaining 18 months, Prime Minister Hamdan was to lead the council. But again, General el-Buran staged another coup in 2021, sorry. So he staged a coup, he abolished the council, and then he appointed himself as the president of the military government and Dagalo as his second in command. But they promised that in 2023, election would be conducted to hand over power to an elected civilian government. So according to reports, they were working on integrating the Rapid Support Forces into the military, into the Sudanese military. A question then arose as to how the integration process should be carried out. How long could it take? The two generals have conflicting views. General el-Buran wanted the integration process to be completed within 1 to 2 years. The other guy, General Dagalo, wanted a slow-phase process that would be completed over a period of 10 years. And he also wanted to maintain control over his forces. So that led to disagreement. And that created high tension within the military. And that those tensions easily led to clashes in April 2023. And ultimately escalated to a civil war that we are witnessing right now in Sudan. So that's the sort of the overview of what led to the war. Now, the war has had a very dire impact on the civilians in particular. as always, civilians are the major victims in any major conflict. Mrs. Akuc will speak about the humanitarian impact of the war shortly. But just to mention, it is estimated that about 3,000 people have been killed so far, and over 2 million people have been displaced. The impact of the war is being felt by the neighboring countries. South Sudan in particular, which broke away from Sudan in 2011, has had a huge influx of people. But there could be more serious economic consequences for countries like South Sudan. More serious economic consequences in terms of the fact that South Sudan is dependent on oil. Oil is the main income for the government of South Sudan, and it is exported in pipelines through Sudan to international markets. So there is a fear that oil pipelines and refineries could be targeted and destroyed by the warring parties. And if that happened, that would basically shut down the economy in South Sudan. So that's part of why the government of South Sudan is, has a special interest in getting the war resolved peacefully and as soon as possible. So President Salva Kiir of South Sudan has made numerous attempts to try to broker ceasefire between the warring parties in Sudan, but he has not been successful so far. So in terms of now, as you may have seen, numerous countries have attempted to try to bring the warring parties to a negotiating table to resolve. Saudi Arabia and the United States in particular have led the way. They have brokered multiple ceasefires, but those ceasefires have not been respected. So the war rages on. The regional bodies such as African Union have also made some efforts to try to resolve the war, to try to bring the warring parties together. The union has issued a communique in which it laid out, what might be regarded as a roadmap, basically calling for, as a first step, the cessation of hostilities, and then the resumption of, an inclusive and representative political process that would end the war. But that's only, they're only speaking about it. There's no decisive action that has been taken to try to resolve the war. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development in particular has recently convened a meeting in which they discussed the possibility to send troops to Sudan to protect civilians and infrastructure. So that's the proposal that has been made. I'm not too sure whether that would be implemented. The Sudanese government has reacted negatively to that proposal, saying that any intervention in the war by any outside force would be seen as an invasion of Sudan and would be met with a serious response. So there is that concern. Well, what could be done if the government is not, willing to accept any sort of intervention in the conflict? What could be done? I'm not too sure what could be done, but that's what is being discussed, a sort of military intervention in the war in Sudan. The UN Security Council has also condemned the war, but has not taken any decisive action in terms of response, practical response to the war. So it remains to be seen whether the Council would take any action. The UN does have the mission in Sudan that is, it's been there since 2020, monitoring it was set up to monitor the democratic transition in Sudan that began in 2020. But so far, it's not doing much in terms of intervening in the war and try to create some sort of a buffer in the country to protect civilians and also the infrastructure. So that's what these bodies have been trying to do. I think there is more that needs to be done if the civil war in Sudan has to be resolved. I think they will need to step up their efforts. They will need to do more. So that's the overview of the civil war from me. So it's a deepening crisis, and it's getting worse day by day. Now, let me conclude by saying this. There is no quick solution to the civil war in Sudan. But I do believe that a negotiated peace agreement is the only way to resolve the war, not guns. The challenge is getting these true military leaders to realize the importance of resolving the war peacefully. That's where the challenge lies. And as long as they continue to have access to weapons and command a large number of combatants, I think it's unlikely that they will give peace a chance anytime soon. Now, that may sound very hopeless, but that's the reality that we are faced with in Sudan. So I don't know what more could be done, but I think that this security organization could step up their efforts. Even more, intervening in the war in Sudan militarily. I think that would be warranted, because what is happening in Sudan is not limited to Sudan. It's affecting other countries, and it's affecting international peace and order. And I think there's more that needs to be done by countries in Africa and international organizations like the UN. So that's what I think. So I probably have spoken more than I should be. So I'll stop there.
We are almost running out of time. Thank you very much. So I invite Ms. Akuc to continue the next section. Thank you very much, Dr. Mark, for that informative session. So Dr. Mark basically gave an overview on two particular implications, the political and economic situation and how that has impacted both Sudan and South Sudan and the neighboring regions. We now welcome Mrs. Akuc to talk on the humanitarian side of things, as well as how the diaspora has also been affected by this kind of, the conflict between the two generals that we're now talking about. So, Mr. Akuc, welcome.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Dr. Mark, and thank you everyone for taking the time to be here with us today. I'll try to keep it very brief to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So I will give you an overview of the social and humanitarian and a little bit on diaspora Sudanese and South Sudanese in Australia here, implications. So in terms of social impacts, as Dr. Mark already briefly mentioned, there are a lot of internal and external displacement, which impacts on the social, on the local economy, as he already said, and the neighboring countries. There has been 2.4 million internal displacement within the country, and over 700,000 people moved into other neighboring countries such as South Sudan. And just within the last 2 weeks, to give you an example of that, of the war, almost about 3,000 people were displaced and went into the nearest state, which is Warab state. And they all went obviously with nothing. And to go into a country that is already struggling economically, it just added that extra pressure on the people within that state and the whole country. Exacerbated economic challenges for vulnerable social groups such as women and children. There has been reports, especially for women and children, where even sexual violence has occurred, and a lot of women obviously have not reported these sexual incidents that are occurring. Some of them resulting into unwanted pregnancies and even sexual transmitted diseases such as HIV, and they have no facilities where they can help, facilities where they can go to get the support that they need. So that should be there. So just briefly on humanitarian implications, as I already mentioned, the displacement within the country and across borders. There's been limited provision of aids as well, such as shelter, primary health care, and food. It is a rainy season at the moment, which has made it even more difficult for the humanitarian organizations to deliver the services that are needed, especially in the rural area. So it has caused a lot of disturbance on there. And in terms of children as well, there's been a lot of, although child protection services within the humanitarian organization have tried their best to assist young people, especially those that have been separated from their families. It has been reported that some of these war parties have actually abducted young men or youth to actually recruit them into this war, which has, some humanitarian organizations have actually tried to get these young people back and have obviously failed in getting some of them back, but those that escape obviously are left with psychological trauma. So there has been a lot of young people, women, and especially the elders have really suffered in this war, like Dr. Mark mentioned before. In terms of here in diaspora, there's been increased levels of anxiety and anguish, obviously, among the diaspora community in regards to trapped family members over there. They've tried to get the Australian government involved. Within the first month it happened, actually the South Sudanese and the Sudanese communities came together and actually wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Australia to urge them to assist their families, because families, even families that went there just for holidays, ended up being trapped there. And so it caused a lot of distress to the families here. Even some people said that the whole war that is happening in South Sudan is actually causing them, or making them feel like they're being re-traumatized from the previous wars and what's been happening. So, and also the members of the diaspora community here have been affected. Even in some areas there, like getting connected with family members have been difficult because the network, the lines, everything has been destroyed. So it creates a lot of stress for the people here. In trying also to support them financially, because they usually send remittance there for them to get them out of the place, but it's hard when those businesses are not working, everything is closed down. So it's been very difficult to actually get access to those things and actually leave the country. In terms of the Australian government, they, within the first month of it happening, they provided $6 million. They pledged it to assist the Sudanese Australians that were over there in getting them out of the country and evacuating in the evacuation process to get them out of the country. Also, but the humanitarian organizations are actually saying that Australia should be doing more. They think that 6 million is not enough to help those people that are there, because the other countries, not just Australia, they've been obviously the US and the other country, Saudi Arabia, have actually contributed way more. So they are urging Australia to actually contribute at least 25 million. They think that would help, because there are still Sudanese Australians that are still stuck over there. Yeah, so that brings us to an end of that. I think it was very brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Akuc. Now, the slide that you just flicked back and forth was actually quite interesting. That gives you a brief scan as to how very quickly, in a very short time, people have been displaced across borders. Those are very high numbers, and it tells you how the conflict itself has been very fragile, and the fact that it actually started within the capital city of Khartoum, going outwards, that was very disadvantaging and affecting a lot of population in a very quick time. These people have never had any warnings as to when is the war coming, which direction, because it just erupted in the middle of the city. You have the airports being bombed, you have hospitals, you have all these major social amenities and infrastructure being targeted, with no any warnings. The traditional or the conventional conflict that have occurred, particularly between South Sudan and Sudan formally, has been at a battlefield, which is a little bit far away from the major towns. So this gives you a glimpse that this was very devastating to the vulnerable, particularly those who have no guns, at that particular time. So those figures there gives you that indication.